again, my friends. Merry Christmas to you. Happy New Year. So you recall last time we left off with the beginning of the classical period in music. And this is generally thought of from the death of Bach in 1750 to the death of Beethoven in 1827. And some of the most incredible developments in music occurred during the classical period. You recall Haydn, generally thought of as the father of chamber music, as well as the developer of the symphonic form. So 1750. While we're here, I'd like to take a little side path and talk about the Moravian Church, since I live in North Carolina and my wife and I are both Moravian. So the Moravian congregation really traces its roots back to John Huss. And you recall from our conversation about the Protestant Reformation, John Huss was a priest who was burned at the stake for heresy in the early 1400s for translating the Bible from Latin to the common language of the people, which was Czech. Well, in the mid-1400s, some followers of John Huss banded together in a loose congregation, not a church per se, but as a loose community in Saxony, Germany. They called themselves, as did others, the United Brotherhood. Well, this group lived in Germany and continued until the early 1700s, 1720s, at which time they faced some religious persecution. So they wound up moving to the Wachovia Valley of Germany. And while in Wachovia, they banded together into a group called the Unitas Fratrum, the United Brotherhood, which turned into, over time, what we know as the Moravian Church. One of the hallmarks of the Moravian Church is they were the first Protestant denomination to do mission work. They sent missionaries all over the world and continue to do that today. Some of the mission work was to the Caribbean and to the Americas, where they would preach to the Native American congregations, tribes that they set up. 1740s, they set up mission work in North America, and 1750s the Moravians set up permanent settlements in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, as well as Bethania, Bethabara, and Salem in North Carolina. Some of the hallmarks of their day-to-day life, the Moravians were a very practical and pragmatic people. And a lot of this is due to the fact that in such small communities, they had a certain amount of work that had to be done, so they had to delegate who would do this work. So if a young man would come to the elders of the community and say, I want to become a wheelwright, an apprentice to be a wheelwright, the elders could say, yes, we will need a wheelwright in 10 years, so yes, you're given permission to apprentice. Or they would say, no, we will not need a wheelwright, but we will need a cobbler in 10 years, so we need you to apprentice as a cobbler. Also, they would make recommendations about marriage, about where people should and shouldn't live. So the community in the Moravian Church was extremely important. Another thing that the Moravians were well known for, and this is something that struck Wesley when he came to America with the Moravians. The Moravians did not separate secular life from sacred life. All life was sacred. So even in the day-to-day mundane living, all that Moravians do, we do for the glory of God. So there is no separation in secular music and sacred music, for example. They thought all music was sacred. So there was no problem in playing secular music on Saturday night and sacred music on Sunday morning. All music was for the glory of God. Remember, in the 1700s, the trombone also was developed. The Moravians loved and love the trombone. This became one of the prominent instruments of the Moravian composers. Trombone choirs were very, very popular in the 1700s and remain popular today in the Moravian Church. So even if you go to the Moravian Church today, you are likely to see a trombone choir. As far as their compositions, they did not like ostentation. They did not like flash. They did not like flair. So in keeping with their simple lifestyle, most of the music does not contain key changes. Most does not contain tempo changes. A lot of the music that they compose revolves around the chorale. Remember, of the 1500s, a hymn tune with variations. Also, the music of Haydn was very popular at the time, so a lot of Moravian composing that you hear now sounds still very familiar to Haydn's style. One reason is the Moravians were extremely proud of their heritage. They also tended to separate themselves from the outside world a little bit, so their music did not develop in the same way as Western Europe. So I'm going to play a piece for you by a Moravian composer named Christian Latrobe. We have very, very few examples of preludes and postludes, for example, from the 1700s, because the prelude and the postlude was thought to accent the performer more than the music. So solo work really was not what the Moravians were all about. Most preludes and postludes to begin and end the service were simply a verse of a hymn. But we do have these written down by Latrobe, one of the few examples of early 1800s Moravian organ music that we have. You will notice, very simple, not a lot of ornamentation, although ornamentation was all the rage at the time. You'll hear that these pieces are short, not a lot of flash, not a lot of flair, no key change, no tempo change. So Christian Latrobe is known as a composer as well as being the brother of Benjamin Latrobe. And you'll know from your history, Benjamin Latrobe is the chief architect of the United States Capitol. So an interesting connection to the U.S. Capitol building. So prelude by Christian Latrobe.